of the things that I enjoy doing with games like Marvel Snap, like Magic the Gathering, is imagining what kind of cards could be made for these games. And I've got 4 to show off today, and each of them is designed in a specific space to solve a problem of another card in the same way that Enchantress makes ongoing cards stop doing things, rather than that powerful card itself being nerfed. So let's get into it. Let's have a look at what we've got here. Our first one is Mania. So Mania is a 4 energy, 4 power. And what Mania says it does is after the first card your opponent plays each turn, any other cards added this turn become a symbiote that bonds with the first card. I know this is a bit wordy, but what that means is, let me fix my camera a little bit. What that means is similar to Clintar, where Clintar just turned everything into a symbiote. Similar to Clintar, every card that comes into play after the first card your opponent plays turns into that same kind of symbiote. But then, like Hulkbuster, they'll get merged together into the one card. And the point behind this is something like Serra or the Silver Surfer deck playing 100 cards, or Leader. So you play this, your opponent plays Leader on 6 when you play 3 or 4 things. Just the Leader becomes really, really big because all the power is added onto Leader. And that means that Leader can only win the one lane that Leader is in. So that was the specific point of creating Mania, was to deal with Leader, but it does also deal with a few other decks that play a bunch of things out in a row. But the other thing is it's highly telegraphed. It's played on turn 4. You know it's in play. You know everything you play after the first card is just going to make one big thing, and you're able to play around that. So Mania itself isn't busted, but Mania puts a leash on Leader. I think that's worth adding to the game. Next up is Red Goblin. Red Goblin is our solution for people complaining about Galactus. What Red Goblin does is he stops your opponent from playing Galactus before turn 6. So whenever your opponent gains more energy than you, create a -1 power Goblin bomb at a random opponent's location. So every time someone tries to ramp using Electro or Psylocke, they're going to get punished for it. Which means that, and like a 1 in 3 chance of filling up a lane that they're planning on Galactusing in, which means they just straight up cannot play Galactus, or helping you win another location in that same way. Which, I don't know if this is a perfect solution, but I thought that this was super interesting, and it also means that, again, same thing with Mania, it's in play early on. You can play it in the same time that your opponent could play a Psylocke to play a Mr. Negative on turn 4, and that's not hugely broken for the other decks that just want to speed out a turn 4 play. Whereas if your plan is to play Electro, every turn your opponent's going to have 1 more energy than you. So this is going to activate every single turn. So this is like a direct answer to that, but also like in the Psylocke on the right, the turn before Galactus activates. So they have Psylocke in one lane, and they're going to have a Goblin Bomb in another location at random, which means that they have like a less chance of having that free location to be able to play Galactus. Or at least that was the point. I don't know that this is going to be super fair and balanced, but the idea is that rather than change what Galactus does, give people the opportunity to play something that deals with that problem. And then the next one, we've got Scorn. So Scorn is our solution to Leech. So Scorn is a 4 energy, 6 power card, and it says, ongoing, if this ability is removed, double Scorn's power and change its cost to 0. So what that does is, first up, if it's leeched in your hand, it is a 0 cost 12 power card. You could play that in any deck if the leech meta is so big and you're so annoyed with it, right? You can play it every time, and just playing it on curve for 6 is fine. However, you can, once it's in play, Enchantress it to double its power, which is probably busted. Maybe it doesn't need 6 power in that case. But you can also use 0 on it, in the same way that you would take away the negative from Typhoid Mary or Red Skull. This has the same thing with the 0 or Enchantress interaction, with the added upside of, if it's in your hand when this happens, it gets a cost reduction also, which is like the opposite. Like, rather than it losing a downside, it without the ability gains its upside. So the idea is that if you're holding this, your opponent plays Lich, you have another big free thing that you can play on the final turn, rather than just like, especially if you're playing something like Silver Surfer where all your cards are 0 power, this will actually come in and do something for you and solves that Lich problem. Then we have the last card, Toxin. Now, Toxin is kind of like, I know this is something that a few content creators have been talking about, that they've been wanting to be able to manipulate, and that is when you have priority, because there's a few times when you going first is super disadvantageous, specific to the cards that you're trying to play, specific to what your opponent is trying to do. And Toxin is a 2/4 with on reveal downside. You cannot have priority next turn, which means that if you're playing it on curve and the 4 power is kind of big, it means that your opponent can't have done nothing, and then you gain priority. Like, you never have priority. And also, if you're playing it on turn 5, like for example, you go Wave Toxin, you definitely don't have priority next turn, and your opponent is playing the one thing on turn 6 that they can play with a 4 mana, and then you're able to do stuff like play Death and not die to Shang-Chi, right? Stuff like this that has the on-reveal effect, you're able to go second and not explode to that. And I know, like, Shang-Chi is a tech card. This is not necessarily something I'm supposed to beat that, but this is an idea about a specific scenario in which not having priority specifically, like, because you can never truly control, you don't know what your opponent's really going to be playing, but Toxin says this is exactly what it's going to be. And then you have control over exactly when you play Toxin, so you can line up a turn to do a specific thing. Which I think would be a really interesting design space for Marvel Snap to explore, because the priority mechanic is really interesting. But yeah, that's it. This is let me full cam. This is the 4 cards that I was tinkering around with today, because I've been seeing people discussing nerfs and a lot of stuff like that. And in my last video, I mentioned it briefly, where I was like, are we just going to have a gigantic patch list every single time? Which I don't want. Instead, I would rather they add, not necessarily tech cards, but like cards that give you opportunity to beat a specific thing, or cards that just don't like lose to that thing that's really prevalent. I think would be really interesting. And we move more towards less hyper synergy decks like we have right now, because you have 12 cards. Every card feels like it's in service of that one particular strategy, and instead moving towards more mid-range, to use an MTG term, where you just have a pile of good stuff that is kind of good against most scenarios. But that's this guy's opinion. I'd like to know what you think. Do you think these cards are cool? Would you be stoked to pull this out of a collector cache? Do you think it would actually solve the problem that it promises to do? Please let me know in the comments. And while you're there typing a scathing review, hit the like and subscribe button, because it helps a lot, and I've been trying to make a lot of content these days, and I appreciate the support. So if you want to check out some of the other stuff that I've done, I'm going to have buttons here for you to press. So check out these things. Press these buttons. Click this button, or click this button. They're both good. Or click that one with the subscribe button and the bell. They're all great.